Kelvin Goh. First one is on the restructuring of the monopolistic companies, and in your manifesto you talk about Astro, you talk about telecom companies. Could you give us some details as to how you want to restructure it? Is it in terms of enforcement new regulations, or basically undoing some of the way the companies are set up right now? And secondly is on, and as a result of that, there could be some fallouts perhaps from the debt side, because a lot of these companies do have bonds in the market. So how would you address that? Second question is on the where you want to lower the cost of fuel, right? The petrol price will come down, and any economists will tell you that the subsidized petrol will create all kinds of distortions in the economy, and in the rest research you also have that. So how would you address that? Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. The high road is the hard road. I was asked to defer my question from the earlier session, and that is, how are we going to address continued capital flight and negative real interest rates? Thank you.
Negative interest rates.
My name is Michael. Thank you so much on the economic hype. To me, all I know is that if we can stop the corruption, maybe we don't have to pay income tax in the next 10 years. Thank you. Okay, I just want to ask some layman question. When I was young, I had many Malays and Indian friends, and we practiced the Muhibah policy. And now this has been destroyed by the BN divide and rule policy. And we would like to see this Muhibah spirit back, and what PR are going to do about it. Second thing, Indonesia progressed a lot for the last 5 to 10 years because they practiced the one nationality and one people policy. No race is jealous of the progress of another race. We believe Malaysia will go and progress better if we can promote this one nationality, and what PR are going to do about it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And we run off the session. Number one, on monopolies, actually there are two parts to that. One is on monopolies that we will not take away, in the sense that, for example, Astro has a license to run cable TV. We are not going to take it away from Astro, but we will open up the market for other providers who wish to enter the market, so that there will be real competition. Then there's the other type of monopolies, which are concessions by the government, where when we take over, then perhaps some of the fears, especially bondholders who have bought bonds sometimes because of MARC credit reports that says that this bond is safe because it is the owner of the company is closely linked to some Barisan national government. So because of that, even if they fail, the Brazilian government will bail them out, and hence bonds are bought. I think most bondholders are protected, and I believe that under all the contracts that we have seen, barring a handful like Puncak Niaga or Syabas, where the bonds are actually, the value of the bonds are actually way in excess of the asset value. All the rest, like for example the LDP that we saw just now, the bond value are well within the asset value of the concessions, which means that whatever we pay the concessionaires, they will have more than enough to pay off the bonds. And where we, in the case of LDP, the government actually have to assume the bonds. After letting off, then we pay the balance to the bondholders. So the bondholders are actually better protected with now the bondholders being the government rather than the concessionaires themselves. So what we did essentially is to take away the ownership of concessionaires to the government, but the bondholders are actually essentially protected. So they are actually quite safe. Just like water. In water's case, when we made our offer, the offer includes the bondholders, which means that they are protected. The only thing was that in 2011, when we wanted to take over, when these water concessionary companies, particularly Puncak and Syabas, could not repay their bonds, we were thinking that is the best chance to take over, because if you can't pay off your debts, you are forced to sell. Unfortunately, federal government stepped in and took over all the bonds unconditionally. And until today, they have not been able to tell us when Puncak and Syabas will start repaying the bonds that has been bailed out by the federal government. So essentially the federal government have put a spanner into the entire restructuring exercise by taking over these bonds without conditions, without terms being signed with these concessionaire companies. So I don't see any other government doing bailout this way. In US, when they did a bailout, they essentially took over the entire Citibank. Here in Malaysia, when you do a financial bailout, the shareholders get to keep their companies, the burden of the debt gets held entirely by the federal government. And the last one, I think my colleagues will touch a bit more on capital flight. I think once the economy comes back competitive, once businessmen, real businessmen, starts being able to compete and do business in Malaysia, instead of having to rely on political cables, on connections, on cronyism to get business, then I think capital, instead of flying away from Malaysia, it will start returning to Malaysia because they will find that in Malaysia, you can make plenty of clean, honest money as well.
Taking on from Tony's comment on monopoly, I think it's also important for us to reassert our belief and trust on the market. Yeah? And that's when looking at the practice of the federal government right now on market capitalization of the bursas alone, you can have an indication that over 1.3 trillion market capitalization, out of which 1 million is actually held by the GLCs. That really indicates a lot on the crowding out. Yeah, that is really indicative of a lot of things that requires addressing, to say of the least. So I think it is important to just not pare down, GLCs to allow for better market competition, but as well, more importantly, is to dismantle all those things that have been mentioned about monopolies. Yeah, I think that will really allow for distortion to be handled and more efficient market to be put in place. And that's where you see better competition, and that's where also you will attract more FDIs and as well DDIs, domestic direct investment, not going out by way of they're going for greener pastures out there. So I think that's so important for me to just give a short comment on that. And more importantly, perhaps, is on the divide and rule thing on the ethnicity and ethnic politics. I think it is different and very contrasting of what Pakatan, in the last 5 years attempts at advocating. We have debunked racial and ethnic politics, and we are, very clearly advancing and advocating a politics of principles. And very clearly as well, we no longer see ourselves, when we get down, we are colorblind. Our policies are essentially needs-based, and it's never racial or ethnic based. So in that sense, once we can forge that kind of what I said earlier as we are Malaysian first, I think we are here to have a renewed nation, and this is why we think that we will go forward, because Pakatan truly reflects the politics that I said earlier, politics of the ta'arafu, politics of mutual, profound understanding, of trusting one another, and this is how I think we should go forward, and we will do away. No, yes, we are ethnic by Chinese, Malay, Indian, not by choice, but we are Malaysian by choice, and we should forge that Malaysian first mentality. Thank you.
The problem with being the last speaker is that you get left with the worst ones. Fuel subsidy. I know that this is one lingering question, because on one hand we talk that we need to liberalize, do structural reform to the economy in order to bring back competitiveness. So there does seem to be a mismatch. But I think we have to understand and appreciate one most important facet of the reform. You need every single group in the country to be on board. The way that Barisan Nasional is talking about reform, and then I pity Grace Jala for that with all his presentations. Because you can't be talking to the poor people that we will penalize you for your subsidy, yet you allow the richest of the richest to get away with everything. there needs to be a measure of goodwill and confidence building in the honesty of the government to do the right thing to effect the structural change. And reforming subsidy is a necessary structural change that we need to do, but it's a question of timing. I personally don't think that you can go into a government and say that, okay, we will penalize you, the poor people of Sabah Sarawak first, we will take away your fuel subsidy. What we will do is that we will take away incentives, compensation, whatever you call it, from the conglomerates and the cronies first, while we convince the poor people, the right-minded and normal citizens of Malaysia, that we have to do the tough decisions. We are doing it bit by bit, and I think if you do that in 1 or 2 years, I think the public will be with you. Then we can embark on the next reform, which is targeted subsidy, including fuel subsidy. I mean, I don't think in any of the discussion at Pakatan level, at least at our manifesto committee, that we talk about completely maintaining, forever subsidizing and distorting the price. Never. It is always about bringing a balance and fairness to our economy. And fairness goes to the man on the street, fairness goes to every single businessman, fairness goes to everyone. So I think the reform will come, but there are stages that we have to go through, and it's a question of priority. And we will prioritize making sure that we take, and to use Idris Jala's favorite words, we'll go for the low-hanging fruits first, which are the cronies. And then once I think people are on board, and I think the public is okay, then I think by then we have enough time to develop a proper targeted subsidy system for fuel subsidy. The last one is very difficult, is about negative interest rate. YB Tony, I think, and I fully subscribe to what he says, I think it's about the messages that we send. I'm not too worried about capital flight. I think people will come back now. On the issue of negative interest rate, and the problem, if you are a government that fully politicizes everything, including economy, and sometimes fudging numbers in order to present and mislead the public, the problem is when you are stuck in things like negative interest rate, and it's quite difficult for the whole normal prescription to take place. Obviously, if you're talking about kalau betul, you know, I mean, the inflations are fully represented, and then there's not so much interference in terms of economic decisions by the government. I think to a certain extent the market and the institutions that work with the market will regulate itself, will adjust itself. The problem is because you know, the end is incapable, for example, to solve the mismatch between wage and cost of living, and therefore the need to always give the impression that inflation is under control and so on. You know, all this, when you bring too much politics into it, it takes away the effectiveness of economic tools, even as simple as interest rate adjusting mechanism that work quite well in all other countries. Because in our countries, if you talk about interest rate, if government thinks about raising interest rate to balance it, and therefore people on the streets will not be too happy, and then with inflation and so on, it will create quite unhappiness, and this is, to a certain extent, it paralyzes the decision-making of key institutions of the government. That's why, to conclude, I think whoever who's I mean, Datuk Sri Anwar obviously, but whoever is managing the country after this, I think we have to move away, further and further away from trying to meddle into every single thing. Let the experts do what is necessary. If you have already appointed the right person to head the central bank, I think she will do the right thing. Thank you very much.